Welcome back to Kdramas Decoded, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode of your favorite K-drama. Episode 3 of Flex X Cop Season 2 begins with a major change for Team 1, as Hyra officially makes her debut as the team's new leader. While Junyoung and Kyungjin are thrilled to have an experienced veteran joining them, I Soo is far less enthusiastic. In fact, he is still traumatized by his previous experience with Hyra at the police academy. However, I Soo soon learns that there is much more to Hyra than her intimidating reputation. A detective who worked with her in the past tells him that she is actually laid back, highly capable, and very good at her job. There is just one thing I Soo needs to know about her. Never make a bet with her. Hyra is unbelievably competitive, and once she decides she wants to win, she absolutely refuses to back down. Unfortunately for I Soo, he is about to discover just how serious that warning was. Meanwhile, Kwon Tae-jaeon remains determined to get I Soo removed from the police force. He meets with Hyra and tells her to report I Soo the moment he causes trouble so that he can use the incident as an excuse to kick him out. Hyra agrees, but she has one condition. If I Soo is eventually forced to leave, she wants to personally choose his replacement. That evening, Team 1 goes out for drinks to welcome Hyra. Things start off normally enough, until I Soo spots a dartboard offering 4 free drinks to anyone who can reach 1,000 points. Naturally, I Soo decides to give it a try. And he wins. But instead of simply accepting defeat, Hyra immediately challenges him. What begins as a simple game quickly turns into an all-out competition between the two detectives. They keep playing, each determined to beat the other, while Junyoung and Kyungjin can only watch in disbelief. Eventually, the bartender has had enough and asks Junyoung and Kyungjin to stop them. But the competition doesn't end there. After leaving the bar, I Soo and Hyra continue challenging each other at different game centers, competing at everything they can find. Neither of them is willing to admit defeat, and by the time they finally stop, it is already extremely late. The following day, however, there is no time to recover. I Soo receives a tip through his app about a supposed ghost haunting an abandoned house. Since he takes the app's report seriously, he decides to investigate. Hyra accompanies him. What they don't know is that the person who submitted the tip is a middle school girl named Ahin. She watches from her bedroom window, excited that the police actually responded to her report. But the abandoned house turns out to be far more dangerous than anyone expected. While investigating, I Soo and Hyra are suddenly attacked. The attackers overpower them, tie them to chairs, and set the house on fire. The two detectives desperately struggle to escape as the flames spread throughout the building. Thankfully, Ahin notices the fire and immediately calls the police station. Junyoung and Kyungjin rush to the scene with the police and fire extinguishers, managing to rescue I Soo and Hyra before things become even worse. The team initially begins investigating the incident as an arson case. But I Soo notices something strange. Inside the abandoned house is a basement door secured with a brand new padlock. That makes absolutely no sense. If the house has been abandoned for years, why would someone recently install a new lock? Soo becomes convinced that something is being hidden downstairs. Hyra, however, reminds him that they need a search warrant. Anything they discover by illegally searching the basement could be ruled inadmissible in court. She steps outside to call Mr. Park and ask about obtaining a warrant. But Mr. Park tells them they first need to investigate enough to establish probable cause. Unfortunately, I Soo isn't interested in waiting. While Hyra, Junyoung, and Kyungjin are outside, they suddenly hear noises coming from the basement. They rush inside and discover that I Soo has already started breaking through the door. When they question him, I Soo casually explains that nobody can stop the owner from breaking into his own house. And that's when Hyra discovers I Soo's famous cheat code. Whenever normal police procedures become inconvenient, he simply buys the property. Down in the basement, the team discovers an area of freshly poured cement. Even more suspiciously, when they knock on it, it sounds hollow. Kyungjin begins digging, and soon the forensics team joins them. What they uncover leaves everyone horrified. Hidden beneath the cement are 5 bodies, each buried inside a suitcase. The discovery immediately turns the abandoned house into the center of a much bigger murder investigation. Mr. Park assigns Team 1 and Team 2 to work together. Because of the sensitive nature of the case, they are ordered to keep the discovery away from the press, while forensics works on identifying the victims. The detectives soon discover that the house already has a dark history. Back in 2016, a couple and their college-aged son were murdered there. Byung-sik was involved in that investigation and eventually classified the case as a cold case because the killer was never identified. Now, I Soo suspects that the house may have been used by a serial killer as a dumping ground for victims. The investigation takes another turn when forensics discovers a pair of prescription glasses inside one of the recently buried victims. Team 2 focuses on identifying the victim, while Team 1 works on figuring out who started the fire. After checking CCTV footage, the detectives identify a potential suspect and trace a rented vehicle connected to the crime. Eventually, they arrest a woman named Jeong Deon. Deon immediately admits that she started the fire. But her reason for doing it isn't what the detectives expected. She explains that a lawyer named Hyun Soo and his boyfriend had disappeared, and she believed the abandoned house contained evidence connected to Hyun Soo. Her story goes back to the murder of Hyun Soo's former classmate, Kim Min Seo. Hyun Soo had been accused of killing Min Seo, but Deon never believed he was responsible. She had tried to convince the police to investigate further, but nobody listened. Deon eventually discovered that Hyun Soo had installed a location tracking app on her phone. According to the location data, the abandoned house was the last place associated with Hyun Soo on the day of the murder. She reported this to the police, but the detective handling the case refused to investigate. So Deon went to the abandoned house herself. She discovered the basement and tried to force it open, but couldn't get inside. Eventually, she decided to start the fire because she hoped the police would be forced to investigate the property and discover whatever was hidden beneath the floor. As Deon is being taken away, she suddenly recognizes one of the detectives. It's Byung-sik. She identifies him as the detective who refused to believe her all those years ago. Byung-sik explains why the police believed Hyun Soo was guilty. According to the original investigation, Hyun Soo had murdered Min Seo at her home before fleeing the scene on a motorcycle. He then returned to his own house and later drove away. The evidence against him appeared overwhelming. Team 2 discovers that Hyun Soo had repeatedly harassed Min Seo, demanding that she meet him. When she refused, he threatened her. Min Seo had even filed for a restraining order against him. Then there was the murder weapon. The knife found at the crime scene contained Hyun Soo's fingerprints, and it was also identified as the knife missing from his home. Even more damning, the disguise used by the killer, who had posed as a delivery courier, was discovered at Hyun Soo's house. Before the police could arrest him, however, Hyun Soo disappeared. He was subsequently placed on the wanted list. But now, the new evidence from the abandoned house completely changes the case. The glasses found with the most recent victim are traced back to Hyun Soo. Could the supposedly missing suspect actually be one of the victims buried beneath the house? The detectives order a DNA comparison. And the results are shocking. The body found in the abandoned house is confirmed to be Hyun Soo. He had actually been murdered around 3 months earlier and had been stabbed 3 times while restrained. This completely destroys the original theory. If Hyun Soo was already dead, he couldn't possibly have murdered Min Seo. So who framed him? The detectives begin reconstructing the crime from the beginning. They realize that the murder of Min Seo appears to have been carefully planned by professionals. The real target was Min Seo, but the killers needed someone to take the blame. So they first murdered Hyun Soo, then used his phone to send threatening messages to Min Seo, making it look as though Hyun Soo was stalking and threatening her. After that, they killed Min Seo at her apartment and deliberately left behind evidence pointing toward Hyun Soo. They then buried Hyun Soo at the abandoned house and abandoned his car at the port, creating the impression that he had fled the country. With Hyun Soo supposedly disappearing, the case would eventually become a cold case. It was an almost perfect plan. Except for one thing. The killers weren't finished. When I Soo and Hyra were attacked at the abandoned house, the killers weren't simply trying to silence them. They had been there for another reason. They were burying another body. That means the 5 bodies already discovered aren't necessarily the end of the story. There may be another victim. Hyra immediately orders the detectives to go back to the beginning and reopen the investigation from scratch. Every piece of evidence has to be reconsidered. Every assumption has to be questioned. And most importantly, they need to discover who hired these professional killers and why Min Seo was targeted in the first place. Meanwhile, Tae-jaeon attempts to use I Soo's decision to buy the abandoned house against him, hoping it will finally give him a reason to remove I Soo from Team 1. But Hyra refuses to let that happen. She assures Tae-jaeon that I Soo hasn't actually done anything wrong, and insists that Team 1 should remain in charge of the case rather than handing it over to Seoul headquarters. She is confident that her team can solve it. The episode then takes a much darker turn. We finally see the people responsible for the murders. 2 professional killers, Jang Yi-chun and Jo Baem-kai, are standing near a river with yet another body. But they aren't alone. Standing with them is a mysterious figure known as Yu Tae-gwang, the so-called killer of killers. And judging by the fact that another body has just appeared, it seems Team 1 has only uncovered the beginning of something much bigger. The mystery surrounding the abandoned house, Hyun Soo's murder, and Min Seo's death is far from over. And now I Soo, Hyra, Junyoung, and Kyung-jin are going up against killers who appear to be professionals themselves. With another victim already waiting to be buried, the question is no longer simply who killed Min Seo. The real question is, who is behind all of these murders, and why are they killing people one by one? That's where episode 3 ends.